This simple piece of paper cost a regular Ohio family $1.5 million. Now, most people think the estate tax is a billionaire's problem, but a single missed deadline forced this family's kids to write a massive check to the IRS. In today's video, I'm going to show you the mistake they made and how you can avoid it. I'm Stephen Neely, a retirement planner and wealth advisor. I've analyzed hundreds of financial plans over the years, and I've seen how simple mistakes, a missed form, an overlooked deadline, or maybe a missing beneficiary can snowball into 6 or even 7-figure problems for families. Taxes and retirement go hand in hand, and when you overlook one piece of the puzzle, it can create massive headaches down the road. In this video, we're going to cover what this mistake actually was, what portability means, and why families who aren't ultra wealthy still need to pay attention. And finally, I'll show you the steps you can take to make sure your plan doesn't have these kinds of cracks hiding in it. So let's get into the video. First, let's discuss what actually happened in this tax case. So you have Faye Rowland, an Ohio resident. She passed away in 2016. Her executor filed the tax form 706 to elect something called portability. Now, this is the rule that lets the survivor use the unused estate tax exclusion of the first spouse. On Faye's return, they reported an estimated gross estate of about $3 million. Not massive by any means, and they calculated what's called a deceased spousal unused exclusion of $3,712,562. The exclusion that year in 2016 was $5.45 million. In simple terms, if the election had been valid, about $3.7 million of Faye's unused exclusion could have been added to her husband's exclusion. Now, before we move on, let me give you a quick example of how the estate tax works if it's not something that you're familiar with. I think it's useful to think of the estate tax exclusion as a shield. Keep in mind that the estate tax exclusion amount actually varies by year. So back in 2016, it was different than it is now. And then when Faye's husband died in 2018, it was also different. So this is a thing that kind of changes from year to year. And then with different tax laws, they kind of up it or lower it sometimes. But to keep things simple, let's just say that each spouse has a $10 million shield, just to use nice round numbers here. So if spouse A dies with a $6 million taxable estate, they've used $6 million and they have $4 million left. Portability lets the survivor, spouse B, add that $4 million to their own, let's say, $10 million shield. So spouse B could protect a total of $14 million if at that time the exclusion was $10 million. It's actually a bit higher than that nowadays. But that only happens if Form 706 for spouse A is done correctly and on time. If it isn't, spouse B is stuck with just $10 million, their personal exclusion, and anything above that can be taxed at 40%. So, that's the real issue is estate tax is really punitive. So to the extent you definitely want to avoid it. If we go back to the Rowland case, the filing had 2 fatal problems. First, it was late. Second, it didn't include asset-by-asset fair market values. The return leaned on the simplified reporting rule where values can sometimes be omitted. But in this case, the way Faye's trusts were structured meant full itemization and valuations were required, and the court said the return wasn't complete and properly repaired. The result was an invalid portability election. Fast forward to 2018, when Billy Rowland dies. His exclusion that year was about $11.2 million, roughly. If Faye's $3.7 million exclusion had been transferred, Billy's estate could have shielded about $14.9 million in total. Instead, the IRS disallowed the DSUE, leaving roughly $3.7 million exposed to the 40% estate tax, which is how you get a $1.5 million extra tax bill for their kids. The thing to keep in mind here is when the first spouse dies, portability isn't automatic. You only get it with a timely, complete properly prepared Form 706. If you miss it, the survivor's estate can be staring at a massive tax bill later on, just like what we demonstrated. And look, the exclusion amounts are higher now, which helps, but here's how you can still get into trouble without being ultra wealthy. Say you're a couple right now with about a $10 million net worth today. That's home, retirement, brokerage, and a small business. Let's say spouse A dies today and that spouse's taxable estate included $4 million out of the $10 million. So using round numbers, assume the exclusion is about $14 million per person this year, which is roughly what it is. That means $10 million of the unused exclusion could be elected and carried to the survivor as long as the Form 706 is done correctly. Now, let's fast forward 10 years, life happens, markets do well, real estate appreciates, and the business eventually sells. By the time spouse B passes, maybe the estate totals $17 million, okay, from 10 to 17 million. Wealthy, but that's certainly not yacht and private jet type level of wealth, right? Now, let's compare the two outcomes. In outcome number one, the exclusion is properly elected at the first death. We'll say the survivor's shield at the second death is approximately their exclusion of about $15 million for simplicity, plus the $10 million DSUE that they're able to, port over to theirs. So roughly, that's about $25 million total. So the taxable estate at $17 million is less than the $25 million estate, meaning there's no federal estate tax owed, which is great. Now, in outcome number two, let's assume that the DSUE, that exclusion for the first spouse, is missed or invalid at the first death, because they failed for the reasons we talked about. In this case, the survivor's shield is going to be the exclusion only at $15 million. That's what it's going to bump up to in 2026. Now, suddenly, that $2 million is exposed at a 40% tax rate, and that's going to create an $800,000 tax bill purely because portability wasn't secured when spouse A passed away. That's the trap. You can be comfortable but not ultra affluent and still end up forcing your heirs to write a 6 or 7 figure check later if the portability step is skipped or botched. Now, let's talk about why this mistake is so easy to make. When the first spouse dies and no tax is due, the natural instinct is to just skip the return, right? You're going to think, well, I mean, especially nowadays, it's a $15 million exclusion starting next year. Why file a form if there's nothing to pay? And that's exactly how families lose portability. The rule isn't automatic. You have to claim it with a return that's on time and actually complete. The second trap is speed over substance. Executors lean on estimates, round numbers, or a simplified approach when the estate includes trusts, business interests, or real estate. The IRS and the tax court don't accept close enough. They want asset-by-asset descriptions and valuations that tie out. If the return is late or the details aren't there, the election doesn't stick. Now, another problem is who's in charge. And this is a big one, again, even for families who are not ultra wealthy. So families often put a grieving spouse or an adult child in the executor's seat, and they assume the attorney or CPA will handle the form. Then what happens? Deadlines get missed, appraisals take longer than expected, and everyone thinks that someone else is driving. By the time the estate settles, the portability window may have closed, or the return that did get filed can't pass a completeness test. Another thing to think about is there's the growth. You can be comfortably under the exclusion when the first spouse dies and still drift into taxable territory years later because markets do well, properties appreciate, or a business does really well, and then it's eventually sold for a lot more than you thought it was worth at the time the first spouse passed away. If portability wasn't secured up front, You don't get to fix that at the second death with a shrug and a note to the IRS. That's when the seven-figure math shows up. Here's the bottom line. Families blow portability three ways. Skipping the return because, we owe nothing, filing late, or filing that's light on the details. Now, let me show you the simple steps to lock this down so it doesn't become your family's problem. Step 1. When the first spouse dies, file Form 706 even if no tax is due. You get 9 months from the date of death. If you need time, file Form 4768 and take the 6-month extension. The goal is simple. Lock in portability while the window is open. Step 2, make the return complete. List assets item by item with fair market values as of the date of death or the alternate valuation date if you elect it. Real estate and closely held business interests should have written appraisals from qualified appraisers. Don't guess. The court isn't going to just accept close enough. Step 3, state the DSUE clearly. The return should calculate the deceased spouse's unused exclusion and show exactly how you arrived at it. If trusts are involved, include the schedules, trust documents, and any elections that affect what's in or out of the estate so the numbers tie out. Step 4, put a grown-up at the wheel. Name an executor who will actually manage deadlines, collect statements, coordinate appraisals, and keep the attorney and CPA moving. Most blown elections are process failures, not tax strategy failures. Step 5, document, file, and confirm. Keep copies of appraisals, brokerage statements, and partnership, K1s, trust agreements, and so on. Everything the figures depend on. Then after filing, save the IRS acknowledgement with the accepted DSUE amount so it's easy to prove later. Step 6, update the survivor's plan. Once portability is secured, revisit beneficiary designations, titling, and the survivor's estate projections. If assets grow, you're going to be glad the extra shield is already attached. Now, if you're not perfectly organized, don't worry about it. Just make sure you secure portability first and put the appraisal statements and the IRS receipt into one place. I think that's honestly 90% of the battle. Ultimately, this is exactly the kind of tax landmine that hides in otherwise good retirement plans. And if you want me to pressure test your plan for issues like portability, maybe Roth conversions, RMD timing, and tax smart withdrawals, click the link in the description. You'll fill out a brief questionnaire, and then I will personally send you a video where I will walk you through the holes that I see in your plan. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.